So let's hit the road. I've had the chance to travel to some pretty interesting places over the last bunch of years, so I thought I'd share some of those stories and reflect about the planning profession along the way. Over half of the world's population now lives in cities. This is just one piece of the big picture of the issues that we're facing. A place like Mexico City, as you see here, is facing a convergence of a number of issues, from urbanization to informal settlements, to economic development, to environmental impact. Globally, we're facing a whole variety of issues that are converging at the same time. I had the chance to go to Beijing a couple of years ago, and this was a picture I took on a Monday. The sky was clear as a bell. Why? Because the government had seeded the clouds with silver iodide to initiate precipitation to help clean the air because the pollution gets so bad. I had never heard of this before I went to Beijing. 6 days later, the sky was clear as mud. The convergence of population growth, economic development, industrial development has created environmental impacts that are real and substantial in China. But of course, something like climate change, the impacts go globally to a place like South Africa. This was a township I was at a couple of years ago, and thanks to climate change, the heat is literally on. This community is set in a floodplain, and because of climate change, flood events are happening more frequently and more intensely, as you can see by the image here. As a solution to the situation this community faced, the national government proposed to essentially relocate the entire community to an area outside of the floodplain. But in talking to the residents there, there's no place like home. These people want to be part of the solution, and they want to make it work in the community where they've lived their lives. Because for them, blood is thicker than water, literally in this case. The bonds that these people feel to the place are so strong that they want to make it work and be authors of their own future in that place, and give some real indications about a sense of place and the depths of it that I think as planners we sometimes don't get to. Times are tough elsewhere as well. In Rio de Janeiro alone, over 2 million people live in the favelas or slum communities. These communities have a variety of challenges, from infrastructure to economic development. But one of the main challenges it's faced is the influence of the drug cartels over the last number of decades. And lately these communities have been under the gun. Special pacification police units have come in to remove this influence in these communities. And while this has created a real opportunity, there's also a gap now in terms of the civil society and the capacities that are there, and that needs to be rebuilt. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. I was fortunate enough to be a part of a workshop through Lead International in June of this year, and the focus was to build capacity and to get these folks organized and to help become authors of their own future, much like the people in South Africa want to be. So while it seems that the future must be fraught with danger with all these converging issues, much like camping in Botswana is, as you see here, I think there's a real opportunity for the planning profession to establish itself in a leadership role based on the skill set that we have as a profession. So while we often say make no small plans, I think that's right given the scope of the issues that we face, but we also need to remember the small scale wins that we can have. If you look at this example from South Africa, a very small scale economic development example, that kind of stuff matters. So when we're trying to address big issues, I think we also need to remember that it's the little things that can make differences in people's lives. A good example here is the art space provided for kids at this market in Berlin. It was such a big hit that this kid was literally jumping for joy. And as professionals, we need to recognize that we have a lot of skill and knowledge, but that we don't have all the answers. The issues we face are so complex that we need to tap into the collective wisdom of the communities in which we work. This sounding board that we used in a project in Regina is just one example of gaining access to that intelligence in the community. And there's no limit to where that intelligence can come from. Sometimes out of the mouths of babes, you'll get the most inspirational insights. This project in Durban in South Africa asked kids to draw their vision of the future of the city, and they turned that vision into public infrastructure to remind the citizens of the views of those children. So as planners, we need to balance a number of priorities at the same time, but always keep our eye on the prize, and for us, that's the public interest now and in the future. And it's important to maintain that focus. Just by etching flies into the urinals at the Amsterdam airport, they managed to lower what they call splatter rates by 90%. I think, as a profession, we've only hit the tip of the iceberg of what we're capable of. While it's important to use our skills for the typical land use, zoning, policy purposes, I think our skill sets are transferable well beyond those regular means, and I think we need to push ourselves to do that. Sometimes when we do that, we'll feel like a fish out of water. We'll be uncomfortable, but I think that's okay. I think given the scale and scope and magnitude of these converging problems that we face globally, it's worth it. It's worth pushing ourselves as a profession to do better and have bigger impact, because we're in this together. The citizens that I worked with in Rio, we're trying to connect them with citizens that are leaders in Calgary and try and get some cross-continental learning, because a lot of what we're trying to achieve is the same regardless of where in the world you are. And this is just a brief overview of my thoughts. I'd love to talk shop with anybody that would like to discuss this further, and if we happen to be in the same city, a pub seems like a good place to do that. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks very much for your time.